The other thing that I'd add, this might not apply as much in the workplace, but definitely in terms of politics, I would say that frustrated maternal impulse is a very
Mm.
politically potent and potentially dangerous force. And
Oh,
yeah, and I think that, like, say, I don't know, attitudes towards refugees in the UK. This might not be as acute in the US, I don't know, but or any number of political causes. This is just one example. I think that the reason you see disproportionate numbers of young women who don't have children drawn to these kind of highly charged empathetic situations where you are like trying to
oh,
save groups of
oh,
people, right, who may well be adult men, but I honestly think that a big part of that is it's like with getting the dogs, it's this tug towards mothering something is
that
really
is a
strong.
good hot take.
Would you like to know more?
Hello, this is Malcolm Collins here. Today with, of course, my lovely wife, Simone Collins, and Louise Perry, our special guest today. You may know her from the Maid and Mother Matriarch podcast, or you may know her from her book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And if you do not know her, we recently did a tour in the UK talking with a lot of rising conservative political stars, because of course that's who talks to us. And she was repeatedly named as the #1 conservative thought leader in the intellectual side in the UK right now. And so we are thrilled to have her on our podcast. The question I wanted to focus on within this episode is, how can we make dating work? Because I think if we look at the world today, everyone who is being honest is saying gender dynamics do not seem to be working right now. So what do you advise when you're advising young girls or young boys about how to go out there? Because let's be honest, they are in a dramatically worse situation than we were. How do you advise them to go out there and find partners? And how might you build new systems that could help them?
It's really difficult. And I say this as someone I've been with my husband for 10 years, and I have that feeling of being the sort of last chopper out of Saigon, right?
Yeah.
Because it was pre-dating apps that we met, and we just met through friends, the sort of good old-fashioned, well, not quite good old-fashioned, right? Like good old-fashioned is actually an arranged marriage, but there was this sort of like brief window, right, post-sexual revolution, pre-dating apps, where you generally met people through actual existing social connections. And I would always advise, where possible, to meet people through actual existing social connections, because apart from anything else, it means you have some kind of vetting process available. The problem with a dating app is it's just a stranger from the internet. And they can, and people will admit, people who like friends of mine, male and female, who've used dating apps will admit that they behave worse with people they've met on dating apps in terms of ghosting or whatever.
Interesting. Huh.
Because they know there are no social consequences, because they know that no one is going to then spread a rumor that they're like a shitty person who ghosts people. This is, particularly if you're in a big city like London, there are just so many millions of people that they disappear into the night. It's like, it almost doesn't feel real, I think, when you use a dating app. So yeah, real social connections is better. It is difficult though. I'm sure you've seen these graphs about how people meet over time, and you went from being like an enormous number of people met at church, for instance, right? And then you see all of that stuff, or at work, and then you see all of that stuff declining, and the apps taking their place. And hey, sometimes people do have flourishing marriages that started on the internet. It's not, it's not nothing. One of the things that we've tried to do with the podcast is we had a matchmaking event in London a few months ago. Yeah, and we're going to do another one. We're planning on doing another one on Valentine's Day, in fact. I mean, I'll tell you, they are not a good way of making money, because you can completely see why the people who created the apps are, multimillionaires plus, right? Because the internet is like endlessly reproducible, whereas in real life events are not endlessly reproducible. And actually you put a lot of work and effort into having, I think it was 60 people who came to the first one. Having all these 60 people in a room is actually very like logistically demanding. But we thought, no, we're going to do it because the podcast, if you're listening to my podcast, that tells you something about your values.
Yeah,
right?
it's culturally selective. They're
Exactly.
somewhat aligned values.
Well,
yeah, it's a very useful filter.
What was the structure of these events?
So we got people to fill in an online form where they gave some basic stuff the kind of demographic details of photo and a few other things about like religiosity and stuff. And then we mostly selected on the basis of having even numbers of men and women and having roughly the same age ranges. Like, for instance, we had like too many young men apply, so we had to exclude some of the young men because a 35-year-old woman is not likely to be interested in a 20-year-old man, right?
Yeah.
So we did a little bit of tailoring like that, and we'll do that for the future. I mean, people have requested, you know, specific age range events and things like that. So with sufficient demand, we can do that. But like, you can see why this isn't as popular as you'd hope, because it is labor intensive and it's quite small numbers that you're dealing with, but it's also much, much higher quality. Yeah. Because you're filtering on the basis of everyone there had to want to get married. Like, that was one of the key things. So no one was there just to hook up. And everyone you could kind of have a basic assurance of shared values, which you can't really find anywhere else, except maybe in religious communities. But then I hear from, I mean, I have a friend, for instance, who met his wife at like a young adults Catholic thing. You know, like you can, meeting through church is probably this, I would say, meeting through extended friend networks, meeting through church or whatever other religious organization. No, meeting through one of my podcast events is obviously at the top of the list because I want to be invited to the wedding. But in terms of like the you definitely want to be prioritizing real social connections. But I do have enormous sympathy because like that does limit your pool a lot.
Yeah. So I want to pull on something you said, because it's something we're doing for our kids. And I'm wondering if had you ever considered doing this for your kids, is arranged marriages. We are looking at specifically the way we're probably going to structure it is around the age of like 24, 25. They get a partner assigned to them that we chose from a network of other family friends who are open to doing this. And if you want to join, let us know. And we basically say, look, this is the one chance you get. Like, we're not going to find another partner for you. If you turn this down, then you're on your own. And it's funny, I mentioned this to a lot of like millennials, and they're horrified. I mentioned this to Gen Z, and they're like, oh my God, I wish my parents would do that for me.
Please relieve me of my suffering. Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So I think that probably the ideal, well, if you look at how different cultures deal with this problem, which is a very, very difficult coordination problem. Like, we must not understate how difficult this coordination problem is. It's through like soft arranged marriages, right? It's not you've never met this person and you're betrothed at the age of 12 or something like that, right? That is unusual. It's more likely you hear about that or you read about that in history more often because aristocrats would be more likely to do that. But normal people are normally not doing that. It's more like you basically have a curated pool to choose from, or you can choose and then we can veto. Like the family can veto, which I think honestly is actually a great way of doing it, because, and in practice, you know, often does. My husband and I often joke that sort of on paper, we could have been an arranged marriage in the sense that we have very kind of similar families. Like that, there's just lots of ways in which we're very socially sympathetic, right, as a couple. As it happens, we just got lucky. But, you know, you can... I think that what does typically happen, honestly, in the best kind of matches is you meet the person yourself, but the families have to be on board for it to actually work. And it soon becomes evident if the families are not on board, and then maybe the relationship withers, you know. But any kind of scenario where the families are completely not on board is just so likely to end in tears. I mean, so if that's a soft arranged marriage, then that probably is the ideal scenario.
I think in the context of this, it's interesting to sort of reflect on how sort of crazy the way our society right now is. Like, we know we're supposed to find a spouse. So I think initially the idea was, well, you still get spouses, but then you get this younger age where like you sleep around a bit and you get to play at what it's like to be in a relationship, but you still basically get an arranged marriage. Like, that is soft arranged marriages, I think, are what we still had in the US, you know, up until like the 40s and the and then it began to become like, okay, you actually test out a bunch of potential relationships, and then you choose when you think you have found one that could be a marriage. Now, what's interesting is people don't do that. They're now like, no, I'm going to wait until I find the perfect one, right? Which is a very different thing. But that's not even what they really do. They sort of now, what I've noticed, I think that this is actually the way things work in secular society, even if secular society won't say this, is you play musical chairs. you date random people and you have sex with random people until one day you realize, holy shit, I need to, like, the music is turned off. I'm on the chair I'm sitting on. And
Yeah.
that's actually how I think things are structured right now.
A friend of mine agrees with that analogy. She actually, funnily enough, this couple that we're friends with, they actually met when they were teenagers. So unusual. Yeah, and now they're married in their mid-30s, but with a baby. But her line, which always makes me laugh, is like, not only is it like playing musical chairs and therefore, you know, losing options with every round, but also that those options are selected for badness. Right, like there's a reason those chairs are still there, and it's normally some kind of dysfunction. So the worst possible advice that you hear so often and is so horrendous is that you should hold off on choosing a spouse until a certain age point. So you should not choose a spouse, for instance, until you're in your 30s, and there's something suspect about any relationship that starts before then. Like the university boyfriend must be dumped, for instance. You should dump the university boyfriend. You should try a few other musical chairs, and then you can actually start seriously thinking about settling down in your 30s. And even aside from the biological clock problem, which is a very serious one, like, no, anyone who's in the same boat as you in their 30s and for some reason unmarried, unless they've been like widowed, there might be a good reason why they're not married. Like there might be some kind of whatever, like aversion to commitment, like a whole host of reasons why people would have selected themselves into that category.
Yeah. So one thing I would advise, so this is for our younger listeners, because it's advice I would give my kids, is the one place I think secular society does give good advice on this is you probably shouldn't marry someone you're dating in high school or middle school. And the reason I say high school, you know, because this is where this is most likely to happen, is because these are the first times you're feeling these emotions and you don't understand that, you know, this is just a random person who you happen to have met, and you are unlikely to, because you just haven't been exposed to that many people in high school, to really have found that optimized person. I think college is when you really should, like, you should aim 70% to find who you're going to marry in the years, if you don't go to college, in the years you would have been in college. Like, I think don't
get your BA, get your MRS, right?
Exactly.
That was a joke among older generations.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, do you remember Princeton Mom?
No.
Princeton Mom. She was this woman this was a few years ago now, whose children, one child maybe was at Princeton, and she had been to Princeton herself, and she wrote a sort of letter to female students in the college magazine.
Oh,
do you remember? And it was so controversial, but she was completely right. She said, you know, listen, ladies, like, you are never going to be surrounded by this many eligible young men ever again in your life, who are single, who are selected for their intellect, conscientious, all these good things. And like, you have nothing to, like, come on, like, university students are so idle. You have basically nothing to do. You should be trying to find a spouse. That should be your goal. And it's incredibly controversial.
And the good ones do get snatched up. And I think that's the thing, you know, there's in a way, we're always sort of like, we get annoyed by progressive culture, but we're always like, it always ends up punishing the progressives the most. You know, the ones who are susceptible to these ideas, they're the ones who aren't lapping up guys. The young, aggressive, conservative women are the ones leaving the college with all the most emotionally stable, caring guys. And that's why when women are like, oh, there's no good men anymore, it's like, yeah, because you missed them. You had your chance. Yeah.
I mean, I make fun of progressives, right? Because obviously it's fun to do so. But I'm saying this as someone who used to be a progressive, right? And I basically just got lucky in finding my spouse when I did. It wasn't through like especially good judgment. It was just pure luck.
Yep.
And actually, you know, like for all that we make fun of them rightly, and I'm not talking about the really crazy blue-haired kind of end of the spectrum. I'm just talking about sort of normal middle class progressive. You know, they're actually great people generally, right? They're generally like hardworking, conscientious, like talented, intelligent, economically productive, all this kind of stuff. Like I actually really, really desperately want the best for these people. And the progressive culture, actually, as you say, it hurts progressives most. It actually channels people towards making decisions which are really bad for them long term, and mean that they don't reproduce themselves as well.
Yeah.
I heard recently about one governor. I haven't looked this up properly, so it may not be true, but the governor of Utah actually hosting a lot of events in the governor's mansion, but not necessarily just for matchmaking. Like he's hosted events where he's just having like everyone who's into fly fishing, come over for a party at the governor's mansion. Everyone who's, a married couple over, 60 years old, like come. And the goal, I think, was to just start connecting people more, because even in a place like Utah, which is insane, I mean, it's dominated by the LDS community. There are tons of institutions where people are meeting, at least as long as they're Mormon, a lot of people. But even there, he feels like there's a need for people to foster more connection, that it's even really hard to make friends anywhere. I mean, this isn't just a dating problem. This is a friendship problem. Rates of friendship are down. People report having fewer numbers of friends. I'm wondering if you think this is something where the government is right to get involved or wrong to get involved. Like if governments, and some governments in other nations have started organizing matchmaking events for youth, matchmaking retreats for youth, would that be scary or dystopian to you? Or would it be cool and encouraging?
Doesn't the government basically do that with higher education? I mean, going back to the meeting in college.
Not really, because there's a lot of disincentivizing people.
Yeah.
Now,
It
if the government
could do so through higher education.
And we've heard many people with regard to demographic collapse saying like, well, a really awesome thing a government could do is for any government sponsored or supported university, you could give women entirely free tuition or room and board, some kind of incentive that not every student gets, so long as they promise to graduate perhaps in a longer period, like they have more years to do it with a child, and then they have a child while they're at university, they meet their spouse at university. And I mean, I think it really would create a big incentive. So do you think something like that would be a good thing, or do you think it would be too on the coercive side?
Well, look, I sort of think that ship has already sailed in terms of the amount that the government interferes in our lives in all sorts of ways, right? I mean, the first thing on my list would be to stop, I mean, the UK government, although this is of course true elsewhere, from doing like explicitly anti-natalist things. I mean, like the way that our tax system works in this country is insane. For instance, families with a stay-at-home parent, typically mother, pay a tax penalty, for instance, in this country, right? There are all sorts of things which is like radically anti-traditional family. So if we've already accepted, for instance, that the government is in the business of educating everyone, if the government is in the business of like providing socialized healthcare and things like that, then you might as well pull levers to try and encourage people to make decisions which are in the interest of the country long term, because of course that's what we're talking about, right? These are questions of national importance. I like that idea. Another idea I've heard is to give free tuition to mothers. So, because one of the things that would be useful is to, I mean, women live longer than men, right? And women also, everyone lives a long time in Western societies. Why is it that we have to encourage women in, say, their mid-20s, the peak fertility period, to be investing in their careers when they could just delay that section of their lives by 5 to 10 years and then work an extra 5 to 10 years at the end? If we could, the problem is that the current career plan is designed for a male life cycle. It's not designed for the maid life cycle.
You start right at university. Like if you get married freshman year, have a kid, like you could have 2 kids before you graduate if you take 4 years to graduate.
And then if you stay at home with them as preschoolers, you're still entering the labor market in your mid to late 20s. It's not that big
with
a deal.
A fresh degree. Because I think the bigger problem too is that women get their degree, they work a little bit, and then they take this huge gap from working. And then, the degree is no longer fresh and their job isn't fresh. Like if you can somehow get everything, like you sort of finish most of your time off the market as a parent, right as your degree.
That's only fresh. 2 kids. The key is that you don't take yourself off the market because you're a parent.
That's
or
true.
if you do, you have a real structure for that.
A really interesting, if extreme, pronatalist policy, a young college-age girl we know proposed for Korea, given how absolutely severe their case is right now, is to make it so that as a woman, you cannot graduate Korean college until after you have had your first kid. And so you could start college before that, but you don't get your degree until you have a kid. And given how important college degrees are within the Korean status hierarchy, this would immediately and dramatically affect the number of kids people were having. Of course, it is a little coercive for my taste, but it would be effective.
But I think a really key problem that we keep having here, and this was shocking to me when we were in the UK, we're meeting with a lot of conservative, leading intellectuals, policymakers, stuff like that, but a lot of them young women.
Mhm.
And I repeatedly kept seeing them making the same mistake over and over again in regards to their relationships, which is they had found people they wanted to marry. And they're like, yeah, but of course, we need to be dating for like 3 years before we can get married.
Right. Yeah.
And I was like, what the are you talking about? If you found someone who is good for you to marry, you need to aggressively vet them and marry them within like 3 months or 6 months. Like
And
that.
don't get a dog.
Yes.
Don't
That's
get a
another
dog.
tip. Don't get a dog. Don't get a dog as a practice baby because
Yeah.
1, dogs are bad practice babies. 2, it'll encourage you to delay having your first child. And 3, dogs are really annoying when you have a baby.
Yeah, well, I say they're worse than practice babies. They are not meant to teach women how to have babies. They're meant to masturbate the instinct that women feel to have a
Right.
baby.
Yes. Yeah. They're a displacement tool.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
The number of the number of yuppie couples in our sort of extended social network who are like, okay, so we meet at X and then we live together after Y and then we get a dog after Z. And then it's like 10 years down the track that you have a baby.
Well, and I
Isn't-
think the way to do this is to frame having a dog without having a child as perverse. And I do that when I see that as like walking around with pornography in your hand. It's like it's the same thing. You are using it to masturbate an instinct that evolved to get you to do what you were supposed to be doing, which is having a loving family. And instead, you subvert that instinct, and it may feel good in the moment when you're playing with the big cute little puppy. But in the long term, it's causing you and your spouse significant emotional distress, likely.
Well, here's the thing that I'm kind of thinking about while I'm listening to this conversation, though. I'm feeling like teen pregnancy is the most feminist option for an intergenerationally durable culture. Because hear me out, right? Like if you weren't to start in college, but instead in high school, then you have the support of your parents for the first baby, which honestly, like in a modern society in which, we're more atomized and everything, we cannot expect as adults to have our parents move in with us, to, always be living in the same place, because
they
if we
may well be a
haven't,
lot older as well.
I'm
yeah,
gonna
and it's
push
harder
back
for them.
very strong on this, Simone.
You don't want to be a teen dad.
No, I don't think that women can appropriately find good long-term partners in their
that's
teen
the
years
problem,
because
yeah.
you do
That's a
not know
challenge.
where the guy is going to turn out in terms of competence. I think a guy who like has his shit together in college is somebody who's going to have their shit
Oh,
together.
okay.
for
So
the
yeah,
rest
we're
of their life.
talking statutory rape teen marriage. That's what we're looking for, where you have, a very good, successful college grad, male college grad. You have, 16-year-old girl.
Okay,
They
yeah,
get
I
married.
suppose I am okay with teen marriage if they're dating college guys.
And that sounds so wrong, but it
Uh,
would be so like, because then, the girl could have 3 or 4 or even 5 children from high school through the end of college, get a great education, have an amazing family support network, have all the flexibility to both learn, develop really good skills, and have help with children at the same time. And then by the time she really needs to like lean into her career and like just kill it in the workforce, she's good. And then
But
also once she's
Simone,
old, she doesn't,
we got to be clear. This is mostly meant jocularly as a joke in our society right now, because while you could conceivably create a society that worked around the system she's talking about, that is not the society that we actually live in. And anyone who attempted this would be very likely to end up a single mother,
or
which is why it would be really stupid. And this also comes down to my general advice of not trying to find a partner in high school, because I know a lot of guys who seemed like they had their lives together in high school, but actually didn't have their lives together. And a lot of guys who didn't look like they had their lives together in high school who actually did. I mean, it's actually like the nerdy, like rocket hobbyist kid who is the kid who made a lot of money, and the jock captain of the football team who's more likely to fall off. But by the time you get to, I'd say like junior year of college, you can broadly tell who's going to have their life together as an adult and who can't. And that's why that's a good age to begin to, and not begin to finalize who you're going to marry, not to start practice dating. High school is for practice dating. College is not practice anymore. But
another concern I have about starting a parental career first, like if I'm thinking about this from the perspective of mother, is I wouldn't want one of my children, or both, like male or female, to like start as a parent and be really into it and then be like, no, I don't want to do anything else, because I want our children to also grow up and have impact on larger society. And I feel like they have a moral obligation to do that if they have the skill and connections and ability to do it. Like they should be making society better.
Also, we live a long time, right? Like,
Yeah.
there is I suppose one way you can do it is if you have so many kids, if you have an incredibly long, I don't know if you know the TV chef Gordon Ramsay, British celebrity, right? His wife just had her 6th child, age 49, and she had her
49.
she had her first child when she was 24. So she's had this incredibly long reproductive career. I know, I like, amazing, right? It's a really interesting fact, actually, how many celebrities who didn't go to university, who come from working class families, end up having loads of kids. I'm sure you know that there's in the quadrant of like, x-axis is education and y-axis is income. It's the high education, low income people who have the fewest kids, and it's the high income, low education people who have the most. And you see this like Premiership footballers who have loads of kids. Anyway, it's a lovely sight. So so one scenario, I guess, is that you have so many kids over such a long, not necessarily tightly packed, 3 or 4 year age gaps, which is the standard for hunter gatherers, right? So that's quite a healthy, like physiologically, that's quite a healthy age gap. You have lots of kids with moderate age gaps, and then by the time your youngest is grown up, you have grandchildren. So then you do basically spend your entire life just looking after children. Like that is one scenario. But many women are going to have 2 or 3 in our ideal, and that's completely that's great, and that doesn't actually take up that much of your life, therefore. So to say, for this, you don't want this scenario, I think, where women are excluded from the workforce between the age of, say, 40 and 60.
One reason
for no good reason. Yeah.
No, that's 100% correct. We're so obsessed with having like 4 or 5, 6, because when you look at societal trends and the number of people who choose not to have any children at all, or even just one, like, so, we have to make up for it somewhere. Plus, there's one really interesting bit of research that people did at one point looking at, I think Malcolm, was it in Norway or was it Sweden? But looking intergenerationally.
I saw that as well. Yeah.
So like, having just 2 kids is very, your odds of having a great grandchild are so low. So we think about it from that perspective too.
So another thing to note, because this is something that keeps getting said on this podcast, which is make sure women can work and participate in the workforce. And I think a lot of people, they may hear this and they might say that's anti-conservative, that's anti-traditional. There was a great, the most recent Nobel Prize winner, I want to say in economics, actually did a piece on this, and I'm going to put the graph on the screen here, which shows that actually no, women used to participate in the workforce at around the rate they do today. There was just a historical period where it went down for, frankly, in a historical context, a fairly short period, which was really at its height in like the 1950s. But if you go earlier than like the 1920s, and then especially if you go into the early 1800s, female participation in the workforce was almost as high as male participation.
But it was often from home, and that's the key thing.
Yeah. So it's more about having sex-specific jobs, which like most societies do end up basically. I mean, we do, frankly.
We
like,
do.
It's just not explicit, but having the type of job which is easily combinable with having children is the way of threading that needle. The problem is that the influx of women post second wave, the influx of middle class women into traditionally male dominated jobs has not produced, like the plight of the female doctor, for instance. I saw a friend yesterday who's a doctor who has a baby, and it's basically impossible for her at this stage to combine motherhood with being a doctor.
Oh, absolutely.
There are points later on where you could, but she had a baby, like too young, right? Late 20s, not very young, but within, like, basically the way that NHS medical training works is it depends on abortion. It depends on and contraception. It depends on women delaying having children until they're at least in their 30s, because if you have a child any earlier than that, it will be almost impossible for you to progress in your career. You just have to take an enormous break or drop out entirely, which a lot of women do. So like that's an example of a career which is now majority female in terms of medical student graduates that is completely incompatible with childbearing. So you end up with all these accomplished women shredding their fertility for the sake of a medical career,
or their careers, which is just as bad. I mean, depending on what you care about. Like it's terrible that women are with this kind of potential are just saying, well, I guess society's not going to get my help, as a medical professional. Like the NHS really needs really good doctors. And I think what's so fun about this too is that this is super tractable. Like if the right number of people high in the NHS in the way its operations run were to decide we're going to fix this. This is, a policy change we're going to make, or, we're going to accommodate childcare in this way or whatever, like they could fix this problem. And this is a really similar thing with female lawyers who are mothers in the United States. I think there's a certain number of minimum hours that lawyers have to work in order to qualify and like maintain all their licensing. So effectively, female lawyers in many states can't work part-time and also maintain their ability to practice law. And this is stuff I never even heard about before we started talking with people about pronatalism. So there are so many really dumb things that we do to even just penalize parenthood when, already there's enough.
Well, you can look at this and see how solvable a lot of pronatalist issues are and why we need to be working on this front at the policy level. When you say, how can you, with the skills of a doctor, make money and contribute to society while being a mother? Well, I mean, historically, you could probably do that in the old model of doctor, which is to be a home care doctor, to travel house to house to do. And it would probably be much cheaper to operate than our existing systems. But you have some big bureaucracy like the NHS, and they're not going to be able to do that. You look at medical regulation in the US, and people are going to push back on that. You look at the lawyer thing that you were talking about. If you actually let them operate within a sane structure. Now, and this is one of the policies that I am most pro as a pronatalist policy for sane family structures that I have not seen any politician push yet is one where if a company is going to demand that an individual works from the office, that they have to prove that they are getting incrementally more productivity from that demand. I do not think that blanketly companies should be allowed to demand that people work from the office. I think that it's a demand that can only be made with evidence, similar to like if I was bringing over an immigrant. And this is going to freak out a lot of these, I'd say, fragile CEOs. But as people who are CEOs who have worked with people working at home and in the office, whenever you see, and we've written about this in our book on governance and running companies, and we've lectured about this like Stanford and stuff like this. Every time I've seen a CEO of a large company saying, oh, it's just not working, we have to bring people back to the office, I've never once seen them provide evidence. Whenever somebody says, oh, we're going to let people work from home or we're going to extend our work from home program, that's always accompanied by evidence. Why is that? Why is it that no one seems to be able to show actual evidence that
and there are a couple of reasons why, right? I mean, like a lot of people implement the back to the office policies because they want to lay people off. And that's a really easy way to do it. And
that's what we think Elon was doing.
The other really bad reason that exists out there, though, which we've seen, we can totally vouch for this, is a form of office theater where basically a lot of people, like Malcolm says, have really delicate egos and they need their peons around them scurrying through the offices to make them feel important. And it's just this like traditional vision of like, it's not real.
I want to elaborate on something you said there, because I don't know if our audience would immediately understand what you meant. When she says they want to lay them off, in a lot of developed countries right now, if you just lay somebody off randomly as a company, you have to pay some sort of financial penalty for that. But if you told them to come to an office and then you said, oh, look, they couldn't make it to the office, after you had them like move all over the country because you said they could work wherever they want, well, then you don't need to pay that penalty. And so it can be used as sort of a trap, which of course, legally, I don't think is something we should be allowing, because you shouldn't be able to demand people come back to the office. And if that was the case, then people couldn't pull these shenanigans.
No, we also, I mean, we're very much in the you should be able to fire someone at will kind of mindset too. So.
I mean, also, even if that costs, so we agree that remote working is pronatal, right? But like, even if there are costs to, say, productivity for remote workers, or like the example that my friend gave yesterday is that one of the challenges of her stage of medical training is that she gets she gets given a rota which changes week to week, and she has no choice about that. So she's told, you'll be doing an early shift this week, and then next week, like that, it's basically completely impossible to arrange formal childcare around that kind of rota. Either you have, so basically you either just drop out entirely, or you have a partner whose job is incredibly flexible, or you have, say, a grandparent who's around the corner and can provide full-time, including overnight childcare. Like, this is very, very demanding expectation. Another example of the NHS being stupidly antenatal is another doctor friend. I know lots of doctors because I used to go, I'm a medical school dropout. Yeah, there, but for the grace of God. When she had a baby at medical school as a single mother, unplanned, but peak fertility, she wanted to be given a job out of out of university near her mother so that her mother could help with overnight childcare in
Smart.
particular, right?
Mhm.
And it was like pulling teeth trying to get the NHS to give her this job, because they had it, they could understand if you had a spouse who was living somewhere, they could understand if you had a child in school, like there were certain things where they
But
would
not a childcare resource.
but not a grandparent. That didn't count as a sort of like an important locus that you would need to be based around, right? All of these kind of examples, it probably is the case that if, say, you had, let's say you have a parent-friendly rota is like an option you can choose if you have a child of a certain age, and let's say you had special provision that you could choose, you had more choice over where you were allocated your first job if you had a child, things like that. It would come with costs. There would be like, I don't think that we should pretend like there wouldn't be downside for the employer from providing that kind of provision. But what we're talking about here is like the survival of our civilization, right? You can't be kind of too, like, the birth rates thing is so important, and people don't yet realize how important it is, that we should be accommodating those kinds of trade-offs very, very comfortably. And the state should be demanding that employers just eat those trade-offs, because like we're talking like some decades down the line where everything starts to go to pieces if we don't.
Yeah. Well, and also, at least traditionally, there was this perception that male fathers were better hires, right? Because they needed the stability. They would be loyal to the company. You could count on them because they had a family to support. And I really resent this is not the same for female mothers you accommodate, because when you get a mother working for you who's really talented and who you accommodate, she, one, is amazing talent, and it's really hard to retain talent these days. And if you give her all the flexibility she needs to, do her job, which she probably loves if she's really good at it, and take care of her kids, she'll stay with you, and she'll often go above and beyond. And we see this with we have a company that we run. It's mostly female. There are lots of new mothers. There's a pregnant mother aside from me. Like, we're extremely accommodating. We're like, just whatever, take whatever time you want, work remotely, like work with your kids. We really don't care. And everyone who is a mother is so hard. They're like among our, everyone of our top players is a mother.
This
And
is
they're
really
so loyal to the
interesting,
company
Simone.
too.
In a previous episode, we had talked about, because we've read these cases of like women who hypothetically try to create all women companies, and they always end up like with everyone tearing each other down and like fighting. And like our company is almost all women, and everyone in it who's not a woman is a gay man, except for me. Like, our company disproportionately hires gay people and women, and it has no drama at all anymore, and it's really like a healthy place to work. And I suspect the difference is that other company was hiring women who didn't have kids, and our company specifically often hires mothers.
Well, maybe this also comes down to the difference between the maid and the mother and the matriarch. The mother is in a very different cooperative sort of phase in life, whereas like maidens are far more likely to be competitive, to be, trying to show something. And maybe there's something about that, like leaning into that, the different life phases that women have.
I think you're absolutely right, because a maid is competing for a mate, right? So there is a reason to undermine other women in sort of status hierarchies and in competition, whereas the mother has almost no reason to undermine other women, because what they would be optimizing for is cooperation and child rearing, and the status just doesn't matter as much because they already have secured their mate.
Yeah, safety and cooperation and all that, and that leads to great employees.
The other thing that I'd add, this might not apply as much in the workplace, but definitely in terms of politics, I would say that frustrated maternal impulse is a very politically potent and potentially dangerous force. And I think that, like, say, I don't know, attitudes towards refugees in the UK. This might not be as acute in the US, I don't know. But or any number of political causes, this is just one example. I think that the reason you see disproportionate numbers of young women who don't have children drawn to these kind of highly charged empathetic situations where you are like trying to save groups of people, right, who may well be adult men, but I honestly think that a big part of that is it's like with getting the dogs, it's this tug towards mothering something is really
that is
strong.
a good hot take.
Yeah, I like that take. I'm gonna have to put a little blurb at the beginning of the video here. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. If people want more conversations from us, one thing they can also check out is not just other podcast episode with you, but Simone has done an episode of your show, so that's a
Oh
good
yeah.
thing to check out. Maid,
Yep.
Mother, Matriarch, and hopefully I'll do an episode in the near future. And yeah, it has been a joy to have you here. So please do go check out her podcast. And if you want
It's
one
really
with us
good.
in it, there is one already out there with Simone.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was amazing.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, and then are you working on another book? Like, what's next? What can we when will we have you back on? Because you have something new to promote.
So I'm writing The Case for Having Kids. So that's my next book.